Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region, and welcome to this Free State Colorado interview. Today, I'm joined by Cory Gaines, a must-read author who reports on Colorado news. You can find his work at his Colorado Accountability Project Substack and at CompleteColorado.com. Well, Cory, I hope you're well, and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's always great to be on here.
Well, Cory, I really appreciate your Substack because you cover so much of what's happening in Colorado that I really can't find anywhere else. You dig into some details, you make some discoveries, and it's really valuable information for anybody who wants to be an expert on Colorado politics and dig a little bit deeper into what's actually happening. So I really appreciated a recent piece you wrote here about Colorado's judicial branch not being subject to CORA. That's not something I was really aware of, but I'm very interested to learn about what you found and kind of the discoveries you made here and kind of learn a little bit about your process for digging into our state government.
Yeah, sure. I'm glad to. Actually, the reason I took, so I ended up doing an entire day's newsletter on just this one topic because, kind of like you, I had no idea that our judicial branch was considered itself exempt from the requirements of our open records law. And there is a process to get some of those records, but I had no idea. So I was glad to be able to put that out there and share with people. And thank you for having me on to talk about it. Because yeah, it's an important distinction to make. And I'm guessing if I didn't know it, there's got to be a bunch of other people that didn't know it too.
Definitely. Well, like I said, I really appreciate how you dig into things, how you investigate, how you're, this one man investigative machine over there, putting so much time and effort in it. And it's awesome to read what you write. But you were doing some investigations here into the TOPS expense report. Maybe start with that
Mhm.
and talk about what you were looking for and kind of what you discovered.
Yeah, so I kind of make a semi-regular habit of when I learn about a group or a person or something else to go look. It's Transparency Online Project, I believe is the name. And it's basically our state's checking register is online and can be searched. So in addition to going and looking up specific things once I learn about them, I'll oftentimes go in and just kind of do regular checks. And one of them, and if you're interested in following along too, I put a link in the Substack, which you can follow. But I search for, say, for example, the Hotel Marriott. Marriott Hotels is a great one to look for because guess what? If our state's going to do some sort of get together, they oftentimes will do it at a Marriott conference center. Marriott's pretty popular. There's probably other ones too. I'll be honest, I haven't made a day of like searching every single hotel brand. Marriott's pretty reliable. And what I found in this particular one was some good sized expenses to our state's judicial branch. You'll see other expenses in there too, but I found some good sized ones to our state's judicial branch, which then I say, well, golly, why is our state doing this? And so my pattern is I'll go to tops first, usually. And if I find something that I think is interesting or something that seems odd or curious, the next step will be to go to the department that's paying that out, which is something you can get in the state tops reports. Which department was paying, how much did they pay, when did they pay it? And when I looked and looked and looked and could not find a place to submit a KORA request, Colorado Open Records Act, I looked and looked and could not find a way to submit that for the judicial branch. So then I go to their media person and I say, hi, I'm looking for this. How do I submit a KORA request? And find out, lo and behold, they don't take KORA requests.
Wow. I mean, you would think under the Colorado Open Records Act, the idea is that the people of Colorado have a right to understand what our government is doing, how they're spending our money, what they're doing with all the money they take from us, and to say that there's
Yeah.
this whole branch of the government that's not subject to it, I think should be shocking to people who didn't know this.
Yeah, it was to me too. And um, so this touch, I won't go into all the detail. You can go read up on this more if you'd like. There's some links in the Substack, but it does touch a little bit on perhaps some separation of powers issues that the legislature cannot obligate the judiciary to do something that would be outside the Constitution. Now, you could read up on that. You could see whether or not you agree with the way the Supreme Court interpreted it. But essentially, what the Supreme Court said was, yeah, we're not bound by this, which would be cool. I can't tell you the number of rules I would like to say that I'm exempt from, just because I don't believe I should be. But nonetheless, that's a whole other newsletter there. So,
Right. And just the whole idea, I mean, it's laughable that, it's that meme you see where it says, we investigated ourselves and found nothing wrong. It's like, we're gonna ask the courts if you, the courts, are subject to Open Records Act, and like, actually, we don't think we are.
right,
Who
yeah,
you gonna who you gonna appeal that to? Who are you gonna talk to? They say, oh, the courts have already decided. What are you supposed to do about it? So that is
right,
interesting, and I can understand too that kind of separation of power. You don't want the legislative branch overly regulating, overly controlling another branch of government because then it kind of
right.
tips the scales a little bit, right?
Hmm.
And creates some imbalance there where you have now all of a sudden making so many decisions. But nonetheless, is what is subject to KORA request, I guess, in terms of our criminal justice system, Cory?
Right. Yeah. So there are two kind of broad classes of public records. There are criminal justice records, and that one falls under a whole other completely different law. You can see it right there on your screen. It says CCJRA, which stands for something which I can't remember right off the top of my head, but it's like Colorado Criminal Justice Records Act, and it's a law that spells out the kinds of record, like which kinds of records you could get that are criminal justice records, when they can be denied. And there is a lot more discretion and freedom, and a lot fewer strictures and rules for CCJRA request as opposed to a KORA request, which tends to be more, it would be less about, for example, an individual criminal case. Maybe you are interested in seeing records behind some criminal case. That would be CCJRA. But what I was looking for was simply, when the judicial department wrote a check to Marriott, what were they writing their check for? Like, that would be maybe a more of an administrative kind of record, and that one would go under Open Records Act. But the court has exempted itself from that, because those records are, again, they're not necessarily, they fall under that different law, but then the judiciary said, well, we're not bound by these rules. Later, however, and if you scroll down, you can see it, the Supreme Court actually did put out a decision, and I linked to some of that info, and it's right there. It's called PAIRR 2, where the state judiciary, the Supreme Court, developed rules that said, here are our rules for administrative record checks. So if you want something from the judicial department that is not a criminal justice record, here's our rules. Here's how you're going to get it. A lot of it looks the same as KORA, with one important, interesting distinction. The court does not have to abide by that 3-day limit. When you do a KORA records request, they have to either get it to you in 3 days, or if it's a complicated record, they have up to 10 if they mention that they need an extension. The Colorado Supreme Court, in the rules, don't mention it, and a recent appellate decision said, as long as you get the records, it doesn't matter how long it takes. So they've exempted themselves in their rules as well. So I guess as long as the records get to you sometime before you die, presumably, then you're okay. And there's a link in my newsletter too for where you would go to find this, like to find the PAIRR2 stuff, and also how you submit. There's an online form, and it's the same form that does criminal justice records as well as their, quote, for lack of a better term, KORA records. You have to read it carefully and submit carefully, and probably be ready to email a time or two to explain to them. When I did it, I had to email and say, where were my records? And the lady I spoke with said, oh, nobody's ever done this before, and we didn't realize our form didn't have the ability to classify it this way. So we missed it. So I have stumbled across the stumbling block, but hopefully that doesn't repeat. But be ready to probably contact somebody, because I bet you something will go wrong again.
No, that's great information and a valuable resource, folks. And it just shows the good work that Corey's doing at his Substack and the research. I mean, what a great resource here that if you wanted to find some information, if you wanted to dig in, Corey's already kind of stumbled through some of it. So just good work, sir. I really appreciate it. And it's interesting too to think, of what's applicable under KORA, what's not, and then what can we do to change it, right? I mean, it seems like either the courts themselves would have to basically create some sort of new rule or some sort of change, or it'd have to be some sort of citizen initiative process, which we've talked about before, to try and make some sort of change to this if the legislature is incapable of doing so. Does that seem right?
Yeah, seems right. It's funny you mentioned that because so I owe a huge debt. I appreciate what you were saying about me with regard to the open record stuff, but I am this big in open records, and Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition is this big. Like they're a giant in the field, and I have leaned on them over and over again as a tremendous help and resource. And it was through them that I figured out, once I emailed the judiciary, it was through them that I figured out more of this context and more of this detail about this Supreme Court ruling. And I also heard from them that they were behind in sponsoring a measure in the state legislature after the Colorado Supreme Court decision that said, no, we're exempt from this, that they tried to go fix the KORA stuff to make the judiciary have to abide by KORA, and that effort failed. And I think it failed more than once, if I recall correctly. But yeah, in theory, if there were enough people upset about this, starting with the legislature is probably the first and best place. And I've thought about talking to my state senator about it. I don't know if there'd be a huge amount of will, but that would be the way it could get done. Or like you say, like an initiative.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love the Freedom of Information Coalition. We're so lucky to have them and all the work they've done over the years to really fight for our Sunshine Laws, our Open Records Act, open meetings laws, etc. So great resource, and it's awesome
Yeah.
with your Substack too, how you always link to everything here. But yeah, fascinating stuff, and it's great to see so many people out there trying to fight for transparency and openness in government. We just need more people in the fight, really. But good stuff, Cory. Any final thoughts here on this one that people need to be aware of?
Well, I was going to say, you got me thinking, and maybe I need to shoot an email over to it. There's a group that's working on some things about making the legislature have to abide by KORA again and open meetings law again after they exempted themselves. And I'm wondering now if maybe I ought to buzz somebody over there and toss it on the table for discussion as to whether or not we could see if we could fold the judicial branch back in with that same effort. Of course, you run into a problem of too many chefs spoiled broth, right? And too many ideas on a single ballot. It's either illegal or it's probably a bad idea. But exercise, like regardless of whatever happens, there is a way to do it, and start watching. You know, get in there and dig around in that TOPS report stuff. Could you be surprised what you find? And it's funny to me. I will email media people or do KORA requests, and the department's like, "Wait, what? We spent what? Oh, here's the thing." Yeah, and then you find out the damnedest stuff, and it's not always like a conspiracy, and it's not always bad, but it never hurts to go look, and perhaps just as importantly, let the government know you're looking. Right? If you find something, let me know, and if it's interesting enough or applicable enough, I'll put it up on my newsletter if you find something interesting. Or maybe you contact your state rep, your state senator, and say, "Hey, look at what this department's doing." I know recently, like there's big to do about Lorena Garcia and Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition, who you can find on TOPS and find tons and tons of grant money going to them. And talking with a member of the JBC, Senator Barb Kirkmeyer, and making her aware of this, because I don't think she was quite aware of the fact that tons of government money is shuttling that way. And getting that stuff out into the open and giving it to a state senator or rep means it can get even more out into the open. And that's a great thing to do.
Yeah, great
Even if
points.
it's legal, it's just great for people to know. Sunshine is the best disinfectant.
Definitely. No, so important, such a important thing, of course, because yeah, I mean and unfortunately it's not just Lorena Garcia, but there's other state legislators where you can find out they're actually working for nonprofits or they are part of these nonprofits. And some of that money, you can find it in TOPS. You can find where they're getting grants, they're getting money from our state government. And it should definitely raise some questions to
Mhm.
say, hey, are you personally benefiting from some of the legislation you're passing? Are you somehow
Mhm.
making money off of some of the bills that pass? And that's important information for sure. But yeah, you can look up Marriott. You can look at some of the different places in here. There's so much different vendors as they list them of where the money's going to. I know people
Mhm.
have looked at how some of the state legislators have been reimbursed by different things. But yeah,
Mhm.
here's what you found here with under tops with the judicial department giving them quite a bit of money here, it seems. Let's see.
Yes,
In-state
hundreds of
travel.
thousands, if I recall
Wow.
correctly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it is remarkable. And by the way, stay tuned because I'm looking in at State Senator Robert Rodriguez, who I believe it's his wife. They own a company together, and kind of like as has happened with now Senator Woodrow, there's some laws that do stand to benefit them and benefit the businesses they run who get money from the state government. Not illegal, swampy as hell.
Yeah, you can see it here, folks, on the screen. May 2nd, 2025, from the Judicial Department. Correctional Treatment Cash Fund. I mean, you got to say, well, where's that money coming from? Where are they
Yeah.
getting it specifically? Where's it supposed to go? And then, oh, look, they gave $218,000 for food and food service supplies. I mean, that's a heck of of a dinner right there.
Right.
$144,000 for in-state travel, 107,000 for rental of buildings. I mean, this is an insane amount of money for a
Hmm.
conference that they hosted. I mean, this is our tax money, people struggling to get by here in Colorado, and you see, wow, they just gave, $500,000 to Marriott for maybe one event, and that's absolutely wild to think about, especially when we have our state government complain about how little money they have, how little resources they have. Folks, if you want a good antidote to that complaining, just get into Tops and see where they're spending the money. And you say, oh my gosh, maybe they have too much money. They don't need any more of our money. We're struggling to pay our bills. And yet here they can afford these incredible things.
Yeah, you're right. And that's another great thing to think about. Like you say, you hear about all this complaining and whining. Well, we don't have any money. We don't have any money. It's like get in there and see where they're actually spending your money. And you'll be surprised at how little of it would be stuff that probably you or I or any other reasonable person would classify as a necessity, especially at a time when money is tight, right? I've used this metaphor before, but like, if money's tight and your water heater is not working, you need to spend on the necessaries before you start worrying about other stuff. I mean, I'm not saying this conference had no value, but maybe this conference could have waited a year, um, and didn't need to happen. And by the way, the other thing you might find out, it's in the newsletter. We won't talk about it now, but you find out, oh, sure enough, there's yet another unelected board who's writing checks with state money. One that I was completely unaware of before I went to Tops, to run this Marriott report. So that's another thing you can find there is these little boards that nobody ever hears about or talks about, but yet they're writing these giant government checks and collecting enterprise money and fees and all kinds of other things.
I mean, and for any business owners watching, can you imagine cutting a check to Marriott for $218,000 for food and food service supplies? I mean, that's insane. I mean, how much money are they spending? I sure some of these conferences have values and this and that, but it's like if it's a
Mm-hmm.
conference, folks. I mean, because you found on somebody's LinkedIn report here this Colorado Collaborative Justice Conference and
Mm-hmm.
unity and justice, well-being in community, powerful keynote speakers. I mean, what's the value here? Don't get me wrong. There's sure there may be some value, but at the same time, folks, $200,000 just for the food, this and that.
Yeah.
It should be enough to get anybody upset and hopefully motivated to get involved and use your voice in our political system here.
Yeah, I scale that sucker down, put it in the Motel 6 and like, put out like honey buns in shrink wrap or something. I don't know. Or
Yeah.
maybe like I say, put it off a year. I don't know. It's remarkable to me, the amounts of money. I look at that stuff and like, I'm in the wrong business. I shouldn't have gone into teaching. I should have gone into like the conference business, you know?
Right, yeah, yeah, absolute insanity. But thank you always, as always, Corey, for the good work you do. People, please subscribe to a Substack. Please check it out. And yeah, look forward to talking to you again soon. And I'm very excited to see what you have to find about state senator's wife and her organization getting some taxpayer money. And that's one of the big stories out there, folks, that our local, that our corporate media, I should say, rather than local, our corporate media is not really reporting on, is how these legislators are basically getting so much of our money, and it's wild stuff. So appreciate you, Corey. Really, thank you again. Always appreciate talking to you. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. As appreciated as always.
Wonderful. We'll talk to you later.
See you.